Okay, recording. 11:41 a.m. Oh, what a relief. The apprehension before hitting record. It's like the breath in. Breath in takes more effort than the breath out. Breath out is just a release. My research prior to hitting record was part of the breath in. And then there's the mind and the limiting beliefs that it provides, not usually for the best. It might tell you this is stupid. What's this? Could be anything. Your dream, your life, yourself, and no such thought for anyone is true. So we thank the mind, it means well, and we move forward. I thank you for being here this week. I love you all. God bless and welcome. Okay, so I've discussed this theory before, and the theory is when we look at old maps, we see New France, New Spain, New England, and not dismissed by the mainstream. They say, oh yes, they possessed great chunks of land. I mean, all of North America and beyond. Just focus on this. And we're told they had very primitive and early colonization, short-lived. And then there were wars settling things once and for all. People were willing to fight wars over what was so primitive. But that's what we're told. And by now, we've looked at every city in the mid to late 1800s. And everything is amazing. Before the wide availability of vehicles, trucks especially, we have managed to build out a city completely. I mean, completely packing it with brick and stone and bridges. Bridges for the horses? Yes. And this is so in plain sight, begging to question. To me, it's more disturbing that more people don't question compared to this BS history. I mean, they're both shocking to me. Again, before public utilities, pumping water and sewer and power. If you don't have these things, there's no reason to go cram yourself in a dirty city. No reason. May as well go live out in the country by a stream where you could bathe daily. To me, this is a self-evident clue. But I propose that whoever built this city had everything. Power, pumping water. We see examples of fountains realm-wide throughout time. I propose they had everything. If you build buildings like this and lay out city streets like this, plan the whole damn city, essentially. This isn't just some haphazard design. Then you have everything. You are the peak of advancement for your time period. And then suddenly the beginning of our history. People in horse and carriage, boats, now suddenly occupying this perfection of a city. As I mentioned, they're dirty, again, pre-plumbing. And they have no shame to offer up depictions like this one. Oh, look here at old New York. So what do they say this was before old New York? New Amsterdam. There we go. The city full of canals. New Amsterdam. A 17th century Dutch settlement. Settled 1624. So Manhattan Island was the seat of the colonial government in New Netherland. There was trading. They had a fort, of course, a fort. And I'll show you. It was a star fort. I'll show it to you right here real quick. There she is. Map of very early New Amsterdam. Boom. So of course the map is dumbed down, and we've discussed the purpose in my last video of maps facilitating the redistribution and inheritance of all of this. But anyway, you have to go back to New Amsterdam maps to see examples of this star fort. So this was Fort Amsterdam. Here we go. So before New York, the streets had been laid out. Of course, again, this map is dumbed down. I think it was just as populated as this one, but yet we see a lot removed. Instead of a star fort, even in this early time period, we see a park. And to this day, the park is called Battery Park. So there it is. We can see the star shape, now just a husk. Probably took it apart and used and sold the blockage as new building material. Or is it still here and buried? And we'll discuss that in a minute. But again, I thought it was important when you do research on old New York, well, we're missing something. We're missing the story before that story. And even our story doesn't make sense. But this kind of flips it on its head. Here we have perfectly cut canals, as we see here, bridges, artificial coastlines, cathedrals, and this massive fort with a cathedral inside of the fort. So is this really a defense mechanism? And this is interesting because we've discussed old forts becoming gasworks, such as in Philly. The Philly Gasworks Company is essentially an old block fort, lending to the idea that they were actually industrial and not military. And again, we're getting to my theory. What is this fort? But first we have to appreciate the old understanding that this was here. We can look at it from Google Maps, and you can see it's just a park now, and even the star design is fading. The park is getting smaller, and we do have this fortage here, a little husk. Let's have a little peek at it, and here we go. This old block fort barricaded in this park, kind of like a round pit of sorts. Castle Clinton, they call it. Here we can see some more of it, the entryway. Great, a little castle story. And what about all those canals that jutted in? Canals appear to be gone. And I was trying to get the elevation, and I did, because again, with the conclusions I proposed at the beginning of the video, I don't think this is a primitive city. I think it's absolutely planned out in every way, and the utilities are running under these streets, plumbing, sewage. As I mentioned, everything was perfect. And so I searched for the lowest point, and sure enough, this Battery Park is the lowest point on Manhattan Island, and that's perfect. Ties in with my theory that before the inheritors took control of this city in their very primitive state, this city was in dysfunction. There was no building to be done, and as we see, mostly demolishing for 50, 75 years. But before this city was rendered dysfunctional, it was planned out perfectly. And all of these streets, if you'll notice, are running into this park, which I confirmed is the lowest point on the island. And it's funny in life. There's some things I could plan and there's some things I can't. Right now I'm going through an upgrade with my septic system, my wastewater treatment system. It goes into a tank and then it's dispersed into what's called a drain field. And your drain field slowly disperses the water. After the solids have been captured and are broken down in a tank, the drain field, or sometimes called leach field, processes all of the water safely. And the ideal thing would be to incorporate this into a garden. Grass, some trees, if strategically placed. And I understand the theory perfectly, and I can see it implemented here on a large scale. This park is essentially a treatment plant, but it's beautiful and functional. Just like everything in the old world. A factory may have been a cathedral, a star fort, a waste treatment processing facility. And I think from the appreciation I've grown of this past civilization, everything they did would have had at least a dozen functions, not wasting anything. And we could do such things today. For example, a waste treatment facility could not only process the waste, but recapture the gases as a resource. powering the whole nation, similar to the old movie Mad Max. They were using pig waste. The principle is the same, capturing the methane and separating the gases, harnessing the noble and precious forms and compressing them and perhaps redistributing them through the same channels in which these roads run. The waste runs downhill, and then you pump the gases for heating and cooking or whatever. Again, this map is showing that these people had their shit together, for lack of a better word, no pun intended. And this park and this building here tanked, and we looked at what's left of the building, how strong and fortified. And this is just what's left. It was several stories tall. And I could flash some star forts from around the world, courtesy of Colm Gibney, just to highlight the similarity with even what remains of this fort. We see similar round ones in all shapes, all complex geometry, but this one is very simple, and it's all that's left. However, we can see in early maps, like this one of New Amsterdam, that this was a complex fort, similar to what we see anywhere in the world. And in all honesty, I don't even necessarily believe the first theory that I proposed, that New France, New Spain, and all these nations actually had built these respective cities. But I do think they all had a claim at one point. And the maps where we see New every country are actually just maps showing their claim. And this example that we're looking at here is just moving in a little closer. However, I think that this map was actually always this. And what we see here is just somebody's inheritance, the Netherlands. Here we see a massive wall, even depicted as the wall, starfort corners. Is there any sign of this wall today? So let's take a pause and look at some old pics. Old pics. I put in old historic maps, Battery Park, New York. So here we can see a very old depiction, and that roundhouse is actually out in the water. So this may be a depiction pre-cataclysm. If it's true that this is the lowest part of the island, then if there was a great cataclysm, a lot of debris would have flowed down here, depositing in the water. And maybe that's what we're seeing. Here we can see an old historic photo, and the park still has a star shape. We can see artificial coastlines, a really old building, and essentially city. Totally weathered and dirty. At least looking like 100 years, needing a good power washing. And here another skyline picture. We see this boat, this sail, and just a towering and bustling, overly built, seeming windowless city. Pretty unbelievable here. Old, abandoned New York City right here. Come on. Not early settlers, not early New Amsterdam. Again, stories, claims. This is pretty sick. Haunting, really. It makes me want to walk around in these buildings. No wonder they demolished. It may have been easier to start over. And again, me personally, in this time period, I'm living by a stream, having some animals, chickens, and maybe I come into the city to gather some old bricks. Does this make any sense? 1902, New York City. Just the antennas alone are like 100 feet on all these buildings. In 1902, again, pre-truck, pre-power, pre-cranes. And cranes is what it takes. Tall, powered cranes. The ability to move them all over. Every building is gonna need a crane, especially with all these frivolous decorations. And so the Star Fort is gone here. Now we just have this Castle Clinton. But right over here on Governor's Island, just across the water, we do have a Star Fort. Let me show you real quick. Fort J, temporarily closed, of course. Everything cool. Everything that we research is temporarily closed or about to be demolished. If you haven't noticed by now. Well, here it is. Since it's closed, I'll show it to you. Block. We see brick and trees and grass growing on top. I mean, in complete ruins. And if you were walking around, you wouldn't really know. Here we can see a little tour that somebody gave us just to see the immense scale of this now temporarily closed, unused monstrosity of a structure. And again, what is this? Does this fit into my theory today? Is this a not only wastewater disposal system, but also something that recaptures the waste, turning it into power, essentially, which would be the smart thing to do, which is what we should be doing now. Instead of drilling, we could turn our waste into fuel. Yes, it is possible. If we were not living in a profit motive system of control. So things like this become abandoned, and we're told they were built for military applications. Fort J. Fort J is essentially a little city. You have a little city here, and the more you go back in the older photos, the more built out the city was. Now it looks like a golf course, and all the buildings are in ruins, all brick. Star Fort is in ruins, brick and stone, but yet very difficult to discard this evidence that can be found everywhere. Again, all throughout the realm. Star Forts. They seem to have been pretty important, and they seem overly built for the time period we are given. Overly built for what we are told they were used for such short time periods. I mean, if we look at Fort Jefferson in Florida, out here, out on the tip of Florida, they're building brick structures like this in the water. 16 million bricks, we're told, and I think that's underestimated. Why would you go build this out into the water? How could you build this in the water? The cannon looks like it has nothing to do with this. Odd. If anything, it's more of a factory. It's more of a means of producing something. Not a defense, but an offense. An offense for the betterment of humanity. Otherwise, you don't build something like that down here with a horse and wagon. No. It's not happening. Not in that time period. Quite possibly not in this time period. Then we have the Statue of Liberty. If you look at old photos of the Statue of Liberty, I'll try to flash one. It was an absolute city. You had buildings all around here, all demolished now. And again, a star fort, perhaps on the lowest point. That's somewhere I could go further in this exploration just to confirm, but at this point I have no reason to doubt that it is the case. All designed with a purpose in the past, perfectly symmetrically placed, acting in conjunction. All of this, I mean, the thing's laid out like a computer chip. And not to mention the island is artificial. Artificial island over here, artificial island, formerly a little city. And everything we have looked at today is so damn advanced, and it's the earliest we are told in our history. So let's take one more pause and look at something else. Final segment. Because I am open to change, I try to embrace it. Today I've gone to the new Grok and I asked it to list every building built in New York City before 1903. Some people say the Grok 3 is better than this one. And I hope so, because this one seems as lazy as ChatGPT. Here it tells me, creating a comprehensive list of every building constructed in New York City is a monumental task, almost repeating exactly what ChatGPT said to me in a past video. It would include thousands of structures. How difficult would it be to provide me thousands of structures? Well, I don't want to be rude. It gave us a few. St. Paul's Chapel, built in 1764 to 66, 2 years. The oldest surviving church building in Manhattan. It withstood the Great Fire of 1776. George Washington prayed here in 1789. So there we go. This brings me to my next point. George Washington. After everything we've looked at today, what about George Washington? Can we really take this man seriously with his wig and his tights? Can we take any of these men in tights seriously? I mean, can we look at a bird's eye view like this and think to ourselves that men in tights had anything to do with this. Valley Forge, 1777. Here we go. A scene at Valley Forge. And here's the man himself. A modest little cabin behind him. Another little log cabin back here. Smoke coming out of the fire. Here, a creepy person admiring George. Oh Lord, I need your guidance. I want to be like George one day. And whatever Valley Forge, under the command of George Washington, a reproduction of the Army's soldier hut at Valley Forge. Here's the soldier's hut. There we go. Ooh, another one. Another reproduction hut at Valley Forge Historic National Park. This is what they lived in. And here we are at Valley Forge Park, an Arch of Triumph. This thing's pretty big. Some new words etched in the top here. We can see this is not as old as the rest of the structure. And here was the arch in the middle of the park. Let's see what we have down here. A little log cabin here. Here is the Valley Forge Historic House. Already looking better than the log cabins. And this is like down the road from proper Philadelphia. So they're playing log cabin out here in the park, and you have a city like this down the street. And again, let's flash a bird's eye view of old Philadelphia, just to get a feel for what George Washington was faced with. But I think that's it for me. I'm gonna make some food. I hope you've enjoyed. I love you all. God bless. Until the next one.